For today's film, we're going to talk to Dr. Bridget Doran. She's a consultant engineer and holds a doctorate in psychology. And she's going to talk to us about her research in distracted thinking whilst driving. Welcome back to another episode of The Prepared Bystanders. Today I'm talking to Dr. Bridget Doran, who is a consultant engineer. She lives in New Zealand and works across both New Zealand and Australia. She has a doctorate in psychology of driver behaviour, and it's her research that she undertook in a PhD that I was specifically interested for us, and to see what her findings means for us as road users and how that can contribute to reducing deaths on the road and seriously injured people. Thank you, Bridget, for being here today. Is there something I missed in the introduction that you'd like to share with us about who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Sophia. It's nice to be here. So I've been working for over 20 years now in different kinds of road and traffic engineering, but I've always been interested in people and society and how people think and behave and what that means for us as system designers for our role in building roads and streets that people will respond to, whether they're thinking about it or not. So that's what we'll get to today.
Excellent. So what are people thinking about when they drive a car?
Okay, so you've jumped straight to the kind of last page of my thesis, which is to kind of bust a myth that people are always thinking about driving when they're driving a car. Actually, people are thinking about whatever else goes through their heads in everyday life. They just happen to be in a car. And driving-related thoughts puncture that stream of consciousness every so often when the driving situation demands it. So I estimate that on urban streets that people are familiar with, they're thinking about driving sort of 10 to 20% of the time only. And the rest of the time, they're thinking about where they're going, what they're going to do when they get there. That's the first thing, and why, and what that means for themselves and their life, where they've come from, what they've left at home or work or wherever, and other thoughts that are triggered by the environment around them, the weather, the trees, the other people's behaviour on the roads and streets, the dogs. Anything that people think about in everyday life when they're not driving, the same kinds of thoughts go through a driver's mind.
Right, okay. And you weren't even in the car with me, so the idea of the initial thought of where I'm going, and then beyond that, it's
Well, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so with your case study, so you did a case study of women driving between home and work. Can you tell us about how you did that? What your data entailed?
Yeah, so I wanted to study a situation as close to habitual and normal as possible. So trying to get inside the mind of a driver when they're doing something completely familiar. So the commute from home to work is the most common repeated trip that anybody does. And so to get inside the minds of those drivers, I decided to study women who commute from home to work near where I lived and near where I worked, so that in a practical sense, I can meet them at their home and have an initial conversation and a questionnaire, and then I would travel with the same woman 10 times from home to work, meet them at the end of their workday, back again, and do that for 5 days. And I had 10 women participants, so 100 trips in total. So the purpose was to see whether this method worked. I sat in the car, and every so often, 5 times during the trip, and the trips were sort of 15 to 20 minutes on average, not hugely long, I would just say, "What are you thinking about now?" And they would tell me, and it worked surprisingly well. It wasn't that people were stunned or put off by having a researcher next to them. It helped that I recruited women who were about my age. We actually had to avoid just chatting because then the conversation would go in a different way and they'd think different things. But we had a rapport, and I could just sit there and they would tell me, what thoughts were going through their mind. And the findings were interesting because the proportion of time spent thinking about driving was no different in the 10th drive than the first one. So you'd think that if it was a bit odd and they felt like they were in a driving test or something, that they'd report more driving focus the first time, but that wasn't the case. They were straight into the weather, their work, their children, their lives from the get-go. So it was really useful to kick off my PhD to demonstrate that that method worked, to find out, some of the range of things that women were thinking about when they were driving, and then to use that to plan some of my other studies.
Right. And do you think, given that you studied women, that men think or don't think differently? I'm thinking don't
Well,
think.
yeah, well, I think I did a questionnaire study first to ask people what they think about their own thoughts when they're driving, and everybody who filled it in, which was 500 and something, said that their mind wanders when they drive. Like, it's just a very human thing. If you say that it doesn't, then I actually don't believe you, unless you're at all like a self-driving car. Everybody's minds wander. I think the content of men's thoughts or different people's thoughts would be different. If you were older or a younger person, you would have different kinds of things that you would tend to think about. But that proportion, I don't suspect that that differs very much. And in a later study, I had males and females, and there was no sex difference between those findings. So, yeah, people I think vary more as individuals than as their gender. I think people have their personalities, they have their own stresses, they're relatively more or less relaxed, they have a lot going on in their life or not so much. And those things tend to impact their attention, I think, more so than whether they're male or female. Yeah, we're all unique creatures, aren't we? And so unique
That's
patterns of
interesting
thought.
because for me, it blows the myth for me that men can sometimes have a blank mind. And when the woman asks, "What are you thinking?" they go, "Nothing." It's like,
Yeah.
man,
So
you're not thinking
yeah.
anything. They must be lying.
Well, yeah, a lot of people in my samples did say nothing. They were allowed to say nothing, and it was about 20% of the time. And I think sometimes they said nothing when they didn't want to tell me what they were actually thinking about, which is fine. And I don't think that those proportions varied much between men and women either. It's just that some people will have less going on in their minds than other people. Yeah. And maybe it's because the most mind chatter vocal people are female academics. I tend to say this. They say, oh, my mind's never quiet. Well, that's who you are, and that's okay. Everybody has ebbs and flows in the amount of mental energy that they have going on, and whether they're tightly focused on one thing or wading across a number of different channels in their mind. Those things I don't think are as important for driving as people's ability for their attention to be compelled to the moment in the right place when it needs to be, in the background of their driving habits and how good a driver they are in terms of keeping a safe and smooth following distance. That's the main one. And noticing things that might be precursors to an incident and responding appropriately. So yeah, those things tend to be more important than whether or not somebody's mind wanders in a general sense.
Right. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
Going to check my cameras. That's right. Okay. So another question for you here is, how do those findings relate to road safety? And are there any insights from crash data?
Yeah, so the first question around how does the understanding the driver's wandering mind relate to road safety? I wrote a paper for the Transport Research Board conference in Washington, D.C. about implications of this for road safety policy. And it pretty much concludes that we're on the right track with Vision Zero and sustainable safety and a safe system approach, because that approach in most Western countries already espouses a compassion for the driver as they are. We try to design environments that are forgiving. We develop systems that build good habits in learner drivers. We enforce the rules so that people can't lapse and get slack. So within that context, we need to design and build transport systems, roads that allow for a driver's wandering mind. And we were kind of already doing that anyway. We want to have safe and appropriate speed limits. We want to have roads that are self-explaining so that the limit matches what drivers feel the speed limit should be. The more consistent and homogeneous road categories can be, the more that drivers switching off doesn't matter so much because their speed is dictated by these unconscious cues around them. They don't have to think every 50 meters, oh, what kind of speed limit is this now? They naturally can carry on at a safe speed, and if something happens, that speed will afford them the time to react without killing or maiming someone. So yeah, it really reinforces the road safety policy that we already have. I do think that it means there are some areas where we need not waste effort trying to educate drivers. So putting up a billboard that says pay attention, I think is a waste of time. There was 0 drivers in my study who said, oh, I'm thinking about the fact that I should be paying attention, or I'm thinking about that sign that told me to use my indicators. That's not how driving works. It's mostly based on habit after you have your full license, and people tune out all of the irrelevant noise around them, which includes advertising signs and a lot of the road signs actually, particularly on those familiar roads. If you're looking for a sign, you're traveling somewhere new, then your focus is quite different. But driving around the streets where you live, you wouldn't even know whether there are curve warning signs or, even giveaways and stops. You just become attuned to all of those. So it's really about speed management through good design of those environments and having a place for everybody in that system. Because in urban context, where my research was all based, most of it, half of serious injury crashes in New Zealand are on urban streets with a speed limit less than 70. So we need to have safe space for pedestrians and cyclists and safe road crossings to keep them all safe, because the drivers certainly aren't thinking about it. And the other implication for road safety is that I did a study on the close to home effect in road crashes and found that crashes are overrepresented close to home compared with travel. And I think it's a small but significant effect overall, because most people in New Zealand and Australia live in urban areas, and there are more reported crashes overall in urban areas. Fatal crashes more likely in rural places, so the effect there is a bit different. But close to home, there's a lot of crashes, and when something unexpected happens is when people are most likely to not be paying attention. They're on the way home or on the way from home, and things are usually the same. They've had this repeated experience probably hundreds of times. If something unusual happens, they may be less likely to react. So those environments need to be appropriate, locally on the streets where we live.
All right, excellent. Now, earlier in your response, you talked about Vision Zero and the safe road system,
Yep.
which I'm familiar with. But for the audience, can you just give us a brief explanation of those 2 points, please?
Yeah, so Vision Zero and the safe system came from the Netherlands and Scandinavian countries, where in the 1990s they worked out that we cannot simply enforce and dictate that drivers conform to the rules without having environments where that makes sense. And when I say it makes sense, it means whether or not people are thinking about it. So we will all have examples that we know of streets that feel appropriate for the speed limit. If you drive, for example, in a supermarket car parking area, you're never usually going more than 20 k's an hour because it doesn't feel like you should. If you're in a really narrow residential lane, people tend to drive 10 to 20 kilometers an hour. So these influences like how narrow the lanes are, how narrow the road reserve itself is, how close the buildings are to you, what kinds of paint markings are used. These have been built into a Vision Zero approach to road safety in many countries for 3 decades now. So the whole purpose behind that theory is that it's not okay for anyone to be killed or seriously injured on our roads, and that when a crash happens, it's a result of a number of factors that don't usually involve a conscious evil intent by a driver to do something bad. A lot of crashes happen within the bounds of being a normal human, and that human shouldn't be punished by being injured or injuring somebody else. So that's the philosophy. And the outcome in terms of road safety engineering is that we try and design streets that afford safe speeds and command people's attention when we need to.
Excellent. And that the Vision Zero is the 2050 goal of no deaths. Did they say no serious injuries as well on the roads?
Well,
Because
I
that's a
think
goal.
different countries have different settings within their own ministries of transport and transport policies, and then local authorities separate that out for themselves as well. So we're generally all trying to head down towards zero. Vision zero is a vision that nobody should be killed while using the road system. That's the goal. Yeah.
And I know Australia is not on track for meeting the 2030 goals. How's New Zealand doing for meeting the
Well,
2030
probably a bit better since petrol prices went up. But
goals?
certainly in terms of matching our investment to our intent, no, we're the same as Australia. We're a bit far behind for a number of reasons. Yeah.
So for the viewers, the 2030 goal for Australia is a 50% reduction in deaths on the road, and that's based on a statistic back in 2018 or 19, and that number is actually 571 deaths, and a 30% reduction in serious injuries on the road. And we say that for every death, there's 30 seriously injured. Is that still the statistic? About 30 seriously injured per
I
death?
couldn't tell you honestly. Similar. Yeah.
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 And if you're not already aware, in 2025 there were 1,300 deaths across Australia, and I think some states went down and some states went up. But there's been this general upward rise. Certainly in 2020 there was a drop in the statistics. We're starting to head up in 2017. There was a drop because there was less of us on the road, but 2021 made up for it. Even if in Victoria we were still locking down several more times, 3 more times, the rest of Australia was opening up, and so the statistics started to increase. And each year since 2021, we've lost more people on the roads, and it was 1,300 last year, plus a little bit. They rounded off to 1,300. Yeah. Fourth question: what does it mean for a driver to regulate their attention?
Yeah. So as we've said, everybody's mind wanders in life and while they're driving a car. The important thing for road safety, and parents who have taught their teenagers to drive will understand this, is when to pay attention and what to attend to. So regulating attention means paying attention to the right things at the right time and having the energy to do that. Because if you see something out of the corner of your eye when you are driving, your unconscious mind needs to wake you up to that. You can't see what you weren't looking for consciously. And so if you're thinking about some challenge you've got driving into work and then you go, oh, what was that? That's your brain working in the background to scan the environment and to see whether there's anything unusual or hazardous or unexpected. Sometimes it is just a cat, but sometimes it might be a child, it might be a vehicle. For example, one of my drivers, when I said, what are you thinking now? She said, oh, that car back there was a bit over the line. So there was the limit line and a car was unusually far out into the road, and that caught her attention, which is exactly how you want brains to work. She wasn't specifically scanning to see who was over the line, but she noticed it because as an experienced driver, we know that there are certain encroachments on our bubble of safety that we ought to pay attention to in case something further happens. So for a driver to regulate their attention, it means they need to drive fresh, and it comes back to the basics of good health. So being mentally and physically well. If you are stressed or if you're really upset or really sad, that's not a good time to be driving. We all might have memories of times we've driven when we've been overwhelmed emotionally. That's not a good thing to do. The same if you're sick. I remember driving home once when I had a migraine and I was not thinking about anything except how many more corners I had to because I felt like throwing up at every turn. So being mentally and physically well means that your mind is working as it should be when you're driving, and you'll pick up on those other cues. When you are stressed mentally or physically, your focus narrows, and then you won't be picking up on those cues that could be precursors to a crash. So my advice always is to drive fresh, to have a good breakfast if it's in the morning, to understand yourself and your nutrition and what you need, and also to understand your energy at different times of the day and night. Because for me, for example, I know that I have a big slump, quite a big slump between 2 and 3-ish in the afternoon. So it's not just a case of avoiding driving late at night or the early hours of the morning. It's knowing through the day, if you've had a huge lunch and you're going to be sleepy, that's not the best time to go for an hour and a half drive somewhere. So taking good breaks, giving people license to have a power nap if that's what they need. And I talk sometimes with employers about having that as a policy, making it okay to do that so that people don't feel bad. If their life, and you don't want a driver to crash, that's not good. Whatever kind of boss you are, it's going to be a headache at best. So building a culture in an organization or in a household that looking after yourself and your energy is super important when you're the one driving a car. That's what it means.
Okay. Excellent. I'm conscious of how much time I'm taking from you. So one more question. How can parents and passengers help to create a calm and engaged driver?
One of my supervisors said, we drive as we live. And if you are an angsty and aggressive person, that's probably what you bring into the car. Ideally, we want to have a situation in the car that is as relaxed as possible so that the driver is as fresh as possible and not distracted by what else is going on. So there's research around being a good passenger, which means basically keeping your mouth shut unless you're invited to help out with directions, for example. Ideally, we want to have a situation in the car that is as relaxed as possible so that the driver is as fresh as possible and not distracted by what else is going on. So there's research around being a good passenger, which means basically keeping your mouth shut unless you're invited to help out with directions, for example. Being on hand to control the air conditioning, the radio at the driver's request, snacks and drink. I'm a big fan of having a water bottle, refreshment in a vehicle, but having someone to take the lid off the bottle for you, that kind of thing can be super helpful. So recognizing that the driver has your lives in their hands and doing your best to support them. And especially with learner drivers, practicing with an adult, a competent adult, is the most protective thing that a learner driver can do. Practice, practice. Even once they have passed their first test, the more you can drive with them driving and you in the passenger seat, the better, because it's as those habits are formed, is a crucial time so that when the driver is off by themselves, they've got a good baseline of habits, especially for speed and following distance. They're the main ones. You want to have a safe and appropriate speed and you want to maintain a good following distance. The drivers, when I was sitting in the car asking what they were thinking about, the ones that I was most nervous about being in the car with were the ones that were too close to the car in front and they weren't allowing themselves the time. And they tended to also be the kinds of drivers who would be quite flip-floppy in the kinds of things they would be thinking about. They're not relaxed people. And that, like I say, we drive as we live. People who are relaxed drivers leave space. They're not trying to be the first one through the intersection. We have a lot of those people in New Zealand and Australia. Some of my drivers would say, when I asked what they were thinking about, oh, I should have been in the other lane to be through that intersection quicker. And they're literally just going home with nothing to do. They just have this competitive mindset. And because those people are out there, it's on the rest of us to leave those gaps and to have as much patience as we can. Obviously, put your phone away, don't have conversations when you're driving, and that's a super important habit to instill in young people as well, that when you're driving, because taking your eyes off the road is a whole different thing from your mind wandering. And when you're not actually looking, then there's no way your brain can pick up on anything outside the vehicle. So managing those physical distractions is what helpful passengers and parents can do. You know, I still meet people, and there will be a certain proportion of people in the police who believe that there's a black and white mandate to focus on driving 100% of the time. And I hear ads like that on the radio or TV, sometimes your focus must entirely be on driving. And I think, well, that's pretty ambitious. Nobody is a perfect robot brain that is going to think about, because if you think about it, when you're driving somewhere, your mind has to wander away from the momentary situation in front of you because you need to know where you're going. You need to know which street you're going to turn down next, where you're going to park, what you're going to do, why you're even here. We're not just a momentary, machine that can make instant decisions and get somewhere and live our lives successfully. So it's the nature of being human. It's remarkable that we can drive a car safely most of the time. When you think about how complex it is, interaction with traffic, all of these distractions, and we're thinking about lunch. I've got a friend who is blind, and he has heard me talk about this, and it terrifies him because he said, as a blind pedestrian, he is absolutely thinking about every step that he takes because he has to, or he'll probably fall over. And to find out that people driving a car are not thinking about it most of the time, he said, well, that's it, I'm stuffed. But that is the nature of being a human. Our vision is processing things disconnected from our conscious mind. And we have grown up to do that because it's adaptive for us, because that's how life works. If we actually took in everything that our eyes perceived, it would be so overwhelming we wouldn't be able to do a single thing. So we take it in as much as we need to, we process it, and our brain feeds us what it thinks is necessary. Most of the time, that's not driving related.
Well, that's reassuring. That's reassuring that we can be humans.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of compassion for the human. Yeah.
Yeah, and besides recognizing, this is what I think a lot of people have gotten lost. You are driving a heavy piece of machinery. When you have those medications, those paracetamols or whatever that say do not operate heavy machinery, people don't think, oh, I'm going to be driving a car. That's forklift. I don't drive forklifts. Like, well, no, a car is a heavy piece of machinery that can do a lot of damage to the occupants and other people, as we know. We don't need to harbour on that. You can hear on the radio every morning how many roads are blocked because there's been a nose to tail or something like that.
That's right.
That's been excellent. Thank you very much for sharing your pearls of wisdom with us, Bridget. Is there something special you're doing at the moment in terms of road safety that you want to let the world know about, or is everything top secret?
Well, no, it's not top secret. In June, I'm presenting as part of a panel on road safety at the Transport Australia conference, which is in Cairns. So I'm looking forward to that. I am keen to talk about reducing exposure, reducing vehicle miles travelled as a road safety intervention. I don't think we focus on that enough. So as well as making cars as safe as possible, the fewer trips they make, the safer everybody is. So that means a focus on fewer and shorter trips and more local trips, walking and cycling. So all of those interventions are road safety interventions too. The less traffic is out there, the less risky it is.
Intervention too, with our rising fuel costs of
That's exactly right. The timing is good.
Yeah. I have some drive-free days these days. I just don't leave the house. Oh. Well, sorry, we got cut off at the end of that film, but I think the main points were covered well. If you have any questions about the film, please let me know. Email me, sophia@thepreparedbystanders.au. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you at the next one. Until then, be prepared.